On the 19th of February through the 26th of March 1945, the Battle of Iwo Jima occurred. The Battle of Iwo Jima was one of the deathly battles of World War II. It caused over 41,000 Japanese and American casualties. Only 260 soldiers were left alive. Why did America and Japan risk so much for one single island? Iwo Jima was a very important island. It had two air bases, which if the U.S. controlled, they could use to get to Japan. It was also useful for Japan. They could prevent America from bombing Japan and also using it for their own military purposes. The B-29 planes that dropped the atomic bombs made their way to Japan through Iwo Jima. Both sides were willing to fight to the death for the air bases on this island. The Japanese army had a fairly simple strategy going into the Battle of Iwo Jima. Their main strategy was to build underground tunnels from which to hide in and shoot out at the Americans. The Japanese created intricate tunnels throughout the whole island. Another thing that Japanese had going into the war was the Japanese believed in their country over themselves. The Americans also had a fairly simple strategy. They bombarded the island for 3 days before the initial attack. The bombing, however, accomplished little to nothing as the Japanese army was lurking in their tunnels. However, the bombings left barely a blade of grass visible on the whole island. After that, the strategy of the Americans was just to try and capture the important areas of the island until the island was under American control. On the day of the attack, the Americans just charged Iwo Jima. The battle took almost 1 month to be completed, and eventually the U.S. won. The battle was a very bloody one at first. America gained almost no land at all. The beginning of the battle started out theatrically quiet. The Marines were unopposed when they landed. As they began to venture up on the beach and out into the open, the silence was broken. Japanese guns started to fire on the Marines, and many of them were mowed down quickly. In addition to their strategic hiding places, the Japanese had previously mounted artillery on top of Mount Suribachi, which fired down on the advancing Marines. This killed many Marines as they advanced on the island. The Japanese were able to fire at the Marines with almost no risk. They hid in their tunnels and shot at the Marines as they came onto the island. Although they were at low risk of getting hit by gunfire, they were still affected by grenades and flamethrowers. The U.S. eventually began to gain land, and slowly but surely, the island fell, and America was able to control it and put it to use. At some times during the long and strenuous battle, it seemed almost as if the Marines would lose. One Marine that was interviewed somebody said, "Look, the flag. They hoisted our flag up Mount Suribachi, and you should have seen it. A bunch of Marines came to life. They just went wild." The raising of the flag happened long before the victory at Iwo Jima, but as this Marine stated, it got up the hopes of the Marines. The Marines fought with more motivation and gusto after the raising of the flag. The raising of the flag was a major turning point for the Marines and Americans in the battle for Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima had 2 air bases on it. This was very useful for Japan and eventually America when America got them. A lot of the time when American bombers were on their way to bomb Japan, somehow the plane got damaged. Since Iwo Jima was so close to Japan, the Americans would be able to make a stop right before going to Japan. Strategically, this would be an amazing thing for the American military, because if they could refuel and land, they would be safer in general and be able to accomplish their mission. Iwo Jima was only 600 miles from Japan. If the Americans had it, they would be able to carry more bombs without the risk of crashing or being hit by unfriendly fire. Iwo Jima was also very important for Japan because they could use it to their advantage and prevent America from using it how they wanted to use it. With Iwo Jima under Japanese control, the Japanese were able to attack American bombers as they advanced on Japan and destroy them. Iwo Jima was also, in a sense, an alarm that warns of danger for Japan. Stopping the Americans was so important for the Japanese, because if America was able to get to Japan, all would be lost for them. The Americans would kill many civilians, and after that there would be no Japanese support for the war. Another part of the Japanese strategy in the Battle of Iwo Jima was for the Japanese to inflict as many casualties as they could to the Americans. Before the battle, many Japanese people knew that they could not win, but they still fought. Additional evidence that Iwo Jima was strategically important for America is that, eventually, the B-29s that dropped the atomic bombs passed through Iwo Jima, along with many other planes that went on to bomb Japan. The dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are two events that were immensely destructive. Two whole cities were wiped out, and in the process, many were killed. After these two bombs were dropped, Japan surrendered the war. Who knows how long the war would have continued without these bombs? All of this was able to happen because of the capturing of Iwo Jima. The B-29s were able to stop at Iwo Jima and refuel before continuing on to their destination. Iwo Jima, from a military standpoint, was a crucial island for both America and Japan in World War II. America could use it to bombard Japan and make emergency landings. Japan could use it for the exact opposite. This island was a large stepping stone towards ending the war. Once Iwo Jima was lost, the war was basically over for Japan. Many people asked themselves if the Battle of Iwo Jima was really worth risking all those lives for one small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That is a question that I leave to you to answer.